of a healthy aquatic ecosystem. And because of the novel engineering that Chicago used many years ago, we use this water body as a waste receptacle. That waste then flows into the Illinois River, which flows into the Mississippi River, which flows into the Gulf of Mexico. Chicago is also the only city in the Great Lakes that's legally allowed to take water from the Great Lakes and not return it to the Great Lakes. We're a significant part of the Great Lakes economy. We are continuously growing, and it's important for us to understand how we use water in our economy. And so all of the businesses that are on the... How many people enjoy going on the Riverwalk now? Raise your hands. All right. Isn't it beautiful? Could you imagine it smelling rank and sitting there at Pizzeria Portofino and, you know, just dead fish, and it smells horrible? All the businesses associated with the Chicago River benefit from a healthy body of water. So for me, it's helping those people connect to healthy water means healthy economy. It also includes educating people on the ecology of our water ecosystems and recognizing that we all have some skin in the game to reverse harm, as well as encourage our elected officials to do the right thing and promote green infrastructure, promote practices and policies that support both the Great Lakes waters and our streams and lakes and other tributaries in the state of Illinois.
Okay, so my other identity, as well as running the Freshwater Lab, is as an English professor, and I'm obsessed with words. And the word that I want to transform, like the word I can't accept, is when we call water waste. You know, I've learned so much from the anti-pipeline movements telling us what water is, which is life. And so there's so many ways that we kill water. And in particular, local way that we kill water, exactly as Mila said, we source it from Lake Michigan. The Great Lakes are the gift that the glaciers are only giving once, right? We've got this gift. And so we pull that water in, right? We mix it with rain that gets caught up in this waste cycle. And then we pay billions of dollars to contaminate Lake Michigan water, then store it, then halfway treat it, and then literally send it as a force of death to the Gulf of Mexico. Because this backward river means that we kill Lake Michigan water, and there's literally a dead zone, which is what it sounds like. A place where nothing can live in the Gulf of Mexico that is the size of the state of New Jersey. And so this transformation and the kind of violent language involved with it, to me, has never been acceptable. But right now, when I watch and chart aquifers collapsing, I mean, it's a crazy thing. Like, you know, the earth isn't going to give this gift twice. You know, aquifers collapsing. And
what's an aquifer?
Oh, an aquifer is groundwater. So, you know, water like we're seeing in front of us here, that's surface water. If you can see it with the naked eye, it's surface water. If you can't see it, but it's there and it sustains animals and plants and people, that's groundwater. And because of overdrying, because of practices like fracking, because of, you know, everyday things like dry cleaning, you know, aquifers are literally becoming so contaminated or so empty that they're falling in on themselves. And because we don't see it with the naked eye, we're not seeing this. But this, you know, end of groundwater means that, you know, we can't accept that term waste for water that comes from Lake Michigan and is mixed with rain. So for me, you know, this day and all the work with my team on the backward river is about a very meaningful transformation of that word waste. Like, let us not treat the gift of this water like waste, right? Let's relate to it as water. Let's treat it like life. And let's do all that we can in our own lives and to demand those with decision-making powers, right, to treat it, right, like that generative, powerful, miraculous, transformative element that it is.
Stop pissing in the lake. How about that?
So go ahead next. So basically this is important to me because I see how you know, when I take people paddling, I notice there's like a whole bunch of, you know, pollution in the water. And, you know, it's really sad to see that, you know, because this is the city that, you know, we live in, and, you know, well, that I live in. I don't know who else is from here, but, yeah, I'm born and raised in Chicago, you know, and it's just sad to constantly see so much pollution. And, honestly, like, I think one of the worst things that I notice is like a lot of people just waste a whole bunch of water, like, and especially when it rains. Like, I don't know if people know this, but like, do you know that like the system overflows the more you use water on rainy days? Like, especially when you're showering, when you're, you know, washing dishes and things like that on rainy days, it overflows, and it, you know, just causes more pollution and, you know, more destruction to like the place that we live in. And it's just really sad to see that, you know. So I feel like we can all just, you know, do a little something to make a difference and, you know, keep our water clean and keep our environment clean in general.
Yeah, so I think, you know, obviously for myself, you know, just being a Native person or being a First Nations person, you know, I am directly related to the water. As an OG Cree, we use the water as a trade route. We use the water to go to pray. We use the water to sustain our plants. But the water is also directly tied to how we speak our language and how we walk about our life. You know, in the past and now as Native people in the city of Chicago. We see primarily along the river, it's people who, on the north side, who own multi-million-dollar homes, and Native people like myself and people from Cheyenne Nations, and Native people across the city can't access those sites. We can't access our ancestral territories because along the river has been privatized. And so it's very important for us because, you know, historically we have used that river as a place of travel and trade and to sustain Native ways of life and being. And we see that today we can't do those things because, you know, our river and lakefronts are privatized, because, you know, when when it rains in our city, you know, our sewage still backs up into our river. And so it's not only harmful for us to be in those places, but we can't be in those places. And so for groups like Cheyenne Nations, it's really important that we, you know, really just start going out there ourselves and accessing our waterways, because that is our right, that is our treaty right as Native people. And really just holding you know, politicians and the communities that we live in accountable, and making sure that they know that it is our treaty right to be on these waters, because we are Native people. As Native people, we have a right to access the water that we have historically used for time immemorial, and we see today that people constantly are disregarding that right.
Well, I think, like, Anthony, I want to like hover over, you know, something you just said, and as we kind of like go forward in this conversation. But one of the things you said was like that you're related to the water, and what that points to is a whole different kind of cosmovision and conceptualization of how to even understand something like the Chicago River or water. And you know, and those are kind of relationships that Native people throughout this hemisphere, and probably and arguably throughout the world, have had with the natural environment surrounding them that were disrupted by colonization and kind of these colonial projects. So I guess the question that I have, as I write my dissertation for you all up here, is what can be said about how colonization, or how are you defining how colonization has shifted that understanding of the relationship to water and what water even is?
Yeah, so I mean, when we before we started, I actually, you know, I walked down to the river just to, because I've never actually been in this park, so I walked down there just to check it out, and I walked through the tables, and as I was walking through the tables, one of the things I didn't see, you know, were Native people or a Native organization over there to talk about the river, right? Because when we talk about the river, as Native people, we know that the river is an autonomous being, and that water has its own rights. People do not have rights over water. we have a right to clean water, but often what we don't talk about is how water has its own rights because it is a living thing. And so, when we walking through some of the tents back there, or the tables, hearing people talk about the water, the river didn't give its consent to be reversed, right? The river didn't give its consent for the city of Chicago or for Cook County for us to shit in our water, right? Those are things that people don't think about. As a Native person, we go home to the water and, we pray there. We go and we talk to the water because we know we are related in that way and that the water still takes care of us. But when we go outside and we're in, colonial areas like the government or organizations that are tabling here, or just in general in the city, that are fighting for really good things, that are fighting for us to have access to clean water, that we can one day hopefully use how we used in the past. But often missing from those conversations are Native people or Indigenous people. And the only way that Native people or Indigenous people are going to be involved in those conversations is if they are there. Oftentimes, we talk about qualification, like, oh, I'm qualified to talk about this. Automatically, Native people are qualified to talk about the health and the relationship the river has to the residents of the city of Chicago and the surrounding area, because we have used that river and our waterways for thousands of years. Our people have been here for thousands of years, as opposed to everyone else who has only been here, for a couple hundred years. So automatically, we are given that right. We know what's best for the water, and we know best how to take care of the water. And so allowing Native people to be in those spaces, allowing Native people to be in those organizations, because if we truly cared about the water and the land around the water and the land that we're on, we would allow Native people into those circles and at the table to make those decisions. It's the only right thing to do. Even in woke circles, Native people still aren't at the table making those decisions, and it's very clear that sometimes a lot of these acts are performative, and I would say it's a call to action and to reflect. If you're from an organization, think about how many Native people you have on your team and how many Native people are there making decisions for you. And that's not going out and finding one to consult where you pay a couple $100s. No, bring them onto your team, because if they're not there when they're gone, you're not going to think about them. You're not going to think about Native people and their right and their access to water.
I mean, it's really interesting because we're at a moment right now, Anthony, where we're literally facing climate genocide. We're literally, facing climate, the brunt of climate crisis. In 12 years was a report that came out about a year and a half. That article that was circulating on the internet, and it's essentially the result of capitalism. And there are and continuously people that are in left circles and woke circles say like, well, we got to we got to take over capitalism. But there are people that remember a time before capitalism, and those are Indigenous people, right? And when we think about some of the stuff with water, that's particularly here in Chicago, because we have the Great Lakes, that is the largest source of fresh water outside of the melting polar ice caps, that is completely mistreated. Still, when Indigenous people or Native people speak about the water in their terms, on their language, as an autonomous being, it's kind of still viewed as folkloric, primitive, kind of like not modern. How do you deal with that fucking bullshit, right? Because it's literally, that is literally the lens that Indigenous people have, the sacred relationship that they have is something that all people really need to get behind if we have a fighting chance to save this planet. So even in somewhere like Chicago, where there is Cheyenne Nations that's doing amazing work, that is, healing land in your own First Nations garden on the north side, how are you kind of dealing with that constant degrading perception, while at the same time, having this kind of ancestral knowledge that is necessary?
Yeah, I think I often, and the youth council often, get treated as like the mystical Indian who loves to frolic among the land and take care of the water. You know, but it's much more than that, and primarily that's because a lot of people don't view indigenous knowledge systems, or they don't hold indigenous knowledge systems, rather, on the same level as Western education. So going back and calling back to how Native people are qualified, you know, our way of being is definitely scientific. I would even argue that it's more scientific than the Western knowledge, right? Because we have a deeper understanding of how our water systems work here in the city of Chicago. And it's just, you know, constantly having to go out there and combat that narrative, making sure people know, you know, what's up. But also, I think you bring up a really good point, like as Native people, when we are going into these spaces, you know, historically, things have always been taken from us and are still being taken from us. So we are very mindful of some of the things that we say when we're in front of large groups of people or speaking to, you know, like the government or institutions like universities, because they will come into our community and mine us for data and then leave without you know, either leaving something in return or making sure that they left our community better than it was. So there are some things that we don't share, and we do that on purpose because it's none of their business. And we're going to hold that, we're going to hold those knowledge systems to ourselves because those things have been taken from us. And they still are taken from us, and they're continually abused and misappropriated.
Can I just kind of echo?
Yeah, please. And this is a conversation, so if anyone has something to add, you know, go ahead.
So first, I belong to an organization called Ecological Society of America, and there is a group that started what's known as traditional ecological knowledge. And a lot of my graduate student friends who are First Nations will do things like give their talk entirely in their native tongue. So 15 minutes with people, mostly white people, looking at them like, what are you saying, right? And then they'll give their talk in English. So making them sit there in that discomfort for, I'm going to speak from who I am, and then I'm going to translate for you. I definitely know, as a graduate student and a graduate student of color at UIC, the way that we approach the world, the natural world, from our perspective is absolutely diminished and dismissed. So how we talk, how we write, the questions that we ask sometimes are filtered through a European mindset. And it baffles me how in a city like Chicago, where we have multiple high-performing private universities, Nobel laureates, authors, that we still have the social and ecological problems today. How is it that you are so brilliant, yet this is Crook County? I don't understand. The way in which we move our solutions is tied to capitalism. So when you look at the type of research that's needed for the Chicago River or watersheds that relates to people of color, vulnerable populations, it doesn't exist. Because the people who are penning the research are not connected to the community, they're connected to things like tenure, right? They want to produce papers. They don't want to save lives. They don't want to know who we are. They migrate to Chicago. They live, work in our amazing city. They do research for another country. And it's very, very alarming and disturbing.
Remember, she said private universities.
Shout out to the public universities. But there's a lot of information that could come from the community working collaboration, but we aren't respected. And we call that project pimping, where people want to extract information and they get the papers, they get the interviews, but we're left exactly the same. And I also want to kind of touch upon colonialism and how we think about water. Water exists in 3 states, right? So gas, liquid, and solid. But the way that people conceptualize water is just through these very discrete boundaries. And so it's, I only deal with rivers. I only deal with lakes. I only deal with wetlands. I only deal with drinking water. There was an organization that said, we want to connect the Great Lakes to Black communities in Chicago. I said, okay, well, there's not even a nonprofit that specifically focuses on water run by a Black person. Fishing Buddies closed their doors. They didn't even know who Fishing Buddies was. And I said, the way to connect to Black people and water is through lead in drinking water and criminality. You know what they said? We don't focus on drinking water. That is not Great Lakes water. I said, well, what the hell is? They only were concerned about the water in the lake. It doesn't work. So you have people in positions that have the resources, that have the network to actually make a difference, but how we want to activate ourselves and the questions we want to ask for our communities are kind of brushed to the side.
And Mila, you brought up our communities. Can you tell us exactly kind of like a bit more about what you found to be the most impacted communities and how communities of color, I mean, we know they're communities of color. It's always the most impacted communities are communities of color, but how are they being impacted? But I also think wherever there is power and domination, there's also always resistance. And so much of these environmental kind of conversations, we hear the what is being done to us, but we don't always, what I want to do also have you speak to a little bit is also what the fuck are we doing for ourselves, right? The resistance that we are doing that is always happening a little bit.
So I am definitely an environmental justice advocate, have been for almost 20 years, and I used to be like, oh, black and brown people, we're the ones being, most impacted. And when I started working for the Sierra Club at the state level, I had to kind of let that go because vulnerability is relative, right? For years, I kept thinking that we're the only people suffering in this way. But then I learned about the poor white communities in central and rural Illinois fighting against CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, whose water is just as dirty by industry, and they're in a red county. And so I started to see similarities of what is vulnerability. And so here in the city, you have communities that are next to water bodies, and not a lot of them. So the southeast side of Chicago, the 10th Ward, where the CDF, the Confined Disposal Facility, Army Corps of Engineer, is trying to store toxic dredge material right on the river. You have the communities that are along the lake. There's only one African-American community that sits on the lake, and that's South Shore. They're losing access to their beach because of the 18-hole golf course that's coming with the support of the Obama Center, created by Tiger Woods, actually. And so you have people losing beach access. You have contaminants going into water. People not being able to fish healthy waters, and so you have bioaccumulation or the transfer of toxins into human diets, mostly African Americans in those areas. And then you have the infrastructure that's failing along the lake that everybody is suffering from, but you have those on the south side of the city that don't have the network and the knowledge and the support of the surrounding community to bring attention to private properties almost falling into the lake. Not to mention, has anybody ever heard of a community called Centerville, Illinois? I see a hand. Hey, all right. Centerville was, because it's been a merger, the poorest city in America. Y'all know how many cities in America there are? Somebody Google it, all right? Illinois has the poorest city. 90% African Americans, 60% of those individuals are over the age of 60. They have been flooding with human waste for nearly 40 years. When I say flooding, I mean having to be removed from their home by boat. And I mean human shit, right? And so it's run by Democrats that look like me. Everybody looked at me like, what? Right? So on some level, people that are impacted lack agency. They're poor, they're vulnerable, they're elderly. And those who are decision makers don't have to look any kind of way other than greedy, right? And so as I think about communities that are vulnerable, even cities that can't pay their water bills to the city of Chicago. So vulnerability exists at the homeowner level. I had somebody contact me saying, hey, I had a pipe burst. The Department of Water came to fix it. I ended up flooding on my end. They came and turned my water off. It's been 3 weeks. It's a pandemic. I can't even bring my child into my home. He can't even get a permit to do the work. So a month he was without water. We have so many different levels of vulnerability, but it's typically those who are poor, those who are people of color, those who are in communities that are less than urban, and that's all across the state.
And how do we see that playing out with Chicago and the Chicago River?
Well, we're here, right? And we're not going to discount or discredit that. It takes for people to come together to educate each other, to be open to understanding what the engineering intentions were back in the day, and us to really think about what is the ethic of equity in water that Chicago wants to move forward. So our mayor actually sits on the Environmental Justice Committee for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, right? You do have ecologists and people that are water professionals that want to reverse the Chicago River. You have businesses that are being negatively impacted by CSOs or dischargers from industry or from wastewater treatment facilities along the Chicago River network that are further away from downtown. Getting people to engage, like I didn't know we had a black marina. It's called the Best Marina. It's behind Altgale Gardens. It is a beautiful site where you can dock your boat, you can hang out. But there are very few businesses and entities that are people of color along the water. And so for me, it is, you have individuals who are dedicated, businesses who rely on the water for their business, and then you have the residents. There's very little connection with water in our school system. Natural history is not taught. 7 out of 10 black people can't swim. So we have so much water here in Chicago that the only time we complain about it is when we have too much of it. Or we can't access it because the beach has been closed down because of E. coli. So we don't have a strong we don't have a strong water literate city or county. And that's something that at the Sierra Club we're very passionate about, to help all of the stakeholders, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what community you come from. How do you help explain water is life? How do you help connect to your universities to ask relevant research questions at the appropriate scale so you can make, you can produce information that decision makers can't push back against? Because we're now in the era of science-based decision making, sometimes.
And when people come on the Hood YZ and they're just like, I'm gonna fucking throw down. So thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Mila, so much for getting this conversation started. But Rachel, I know you were gonna say something, and whatever it is, say it, because this is your event. But also because one of the things that I do want to ask though is, we hear this all the time, like they reversed the Chicago River, but we're not really. I'm never like, and even me, that's pretends I'm getting a doctorate degree sometimes. But never write or do my dissertation. I was supposed to got a scholarship to work on it for 3 months, and I wrote 2 pages. But I guess one of my questions is we talk about the Chicago River. I'm really interested in what were those politics and what was that allowed the river to be reversed, and how did this become a giant toilet bowl?
Yeah. So, here's the banner above us is the backward river, because it literally runs backward, but we're looking...
That's not that inventive of a title then. I thought it was
wait, let me finish the next part. Because, we've also been looking at 160, 150 years of backward policies.
Oh,
right?
I see what you did there, Rachel. I got bars, yo.
So to kind of add, just as I am eternally inspired by dialogue with Mila, to add to what she was saying, this drama and these backward policies are in place right now. We're on the river here today because there are 2 big publicly funded trends underway. And one is using public money to build high-priced condos and biotech centers that are going to flood with untreated sewage and are to attract some kind of mythical figures who are supposed to fix some kind of mythical economy.
Can you talk really quick, just for a point of clarification?
Yeah.
You said untreated sewage?
Yeah.
What is treated sewage? Is when you off, or is it what does it mean? Right.
Okay, well, wait, let me go to what's on the river and then we'll get to sewage, right? Okay, yeah, well, I'm whoa, too many terms. So, we've got these huge condo complexes underway, on the North Branch, and what we have down this way, including just around the bend, are the publicly funded developments of warehouses filled with commodities made of plastic that bring diesel trucks into the neighborhood and exploit workers. So it's we're already funding without us knowing high-priced condos on one side and these big warehouses to serve box stores and corporate interests on the other. So it's a pivotal moment. And you know, why is that pivotal in this ongoing history? Well, the river was reversed to begin with because, you know, this turn around the bend is Bubbly Creek. And that creek was so abused at the onset of industrial meat production. And all that offal and all that waste, you know, just dumped right in the water when it still flowed to Lake Michigan. And people started getting cholera, massive public health outbreaks. But not for one moment did the city, did any decision makers go to meatpacking and say, you know what? You have to change how you do this. You have to stop. You have to scale down. Like even when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle about that river, they got food safety laws.
Never read it. I was mostly never read it.
Sad book. Right, but never like, so this idea that somehow we have no voice before meatpacking, right? We have no voice before the Koch brothers, right? We've got no voice before Target and Amazon. This is what's backward. You know, this is what is unacceptable. So what's going to happen? I'm going to get your sewage thing in. Watch me. Yeah. Watch me go. I'm going to get sewage in.
I believe in you.
Thank you. Right, so there's two things that are going to happen. Either they're going to build these huge warehouses and the shiny $1 million condos and the mythical people are going to come and inhabit them. So either like that's all going to happen, but you know, we flood here. We flood for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that, like I said before, we treat the water like waste. And the other reason we flood is because climate change brings more rain. So it's this combination of the water in our built environment, and we don't have anywhere for this to go. And so what I meant by untreated sewage is what goes on right now is we treat the water and the rain like waste. And we pay $1 billion to store it in something called the deep tunnel. And then we stagger that to the wastewater treatment plant, and we spend a good amount of money treating it like halfway. Then we release it into the water bodies. But oftentimes, like there's not even, this built environment doesn't even have the capacity. So when the whole system backs up, and I was down underground once in the deep tunnel when it happened, when we went above the red line, then all of this untreated waste, think about everything that's on the ground, everything in your drains, everything from factories, they just release it. You know, you can kind of see a few out here, these outfall pipes. It's like the sewer's revenge. Everything we try to send to the Gulf of Mexico comes spitting back out at us. And so to keep going with this backward status quo, we're going to have these warehouses and $1 million condos, kind of like the end of Parasite, right? It's just going to be kind of like all inundated in everything that got termed waste in modernity. Or we're going to change it all right now this weekend. Yeah. Who's staying late? Like after the dance party, we'll reimagine it.
For being so hopeful, Rachel. But I do think one of the things I do want to like think about, right, is because Mila, Chicago Adventure Therapy, Chicago Adventure Therapy is actually putting forth some kind of very practical ways of connecting communities of color to the river. Can you talk to us a little bit into nature? You said that, you know, I think the exact words you said is that when we take, when we go paddling, you said we take people paddling. Can you talk to us a little bit about how Chicago Adventure Therapy came about and what are the philosophies and some of the work that you all are doing in this shitty river, literally?
Yeah, so basically the way Chicago Adventure Therapy came about was Andrea Nepper, which is the founder of Chicago Adventure Therapy. She basically, you know, she worked with a 6-year-old girl that, you know, was like really afraid to like paddle, and, you know, within 2 days she got her to like be like this really fearless paddler. And, you know, she also worked with this young boy who was really, how could I describe him? For lack of a better term, very ADHD, you know? Like, I have that myself, so I can relate. Yeah, so she kind of took those two things together, and she's like, you know what? You know, a lot of these people need to, you know, like, I need to get a lot of these people out from, you know, these marginalized communities and, you know, help them do a whole bunch of things and you know, become fearless, or at least deal with their fear in a, you know, in a good way, you know, in a positive way. And you know, so we work with people with you know, people who come with, you know, come from marginalized communities, and people who are, you know, part of the LGBTQ community, a lot of people of color, and we try to expose them to nature. And a lot of the stuff we do is sometimes we, you know, take them paddling, as I mentioned, and, you know, we let them explore the outdoors and see, you know, our environment, because like that, people can actually, you know, see what we're working with. And when you get into contact with nature, I feel like you actually realize what's around us, and, you know, like that makes you want to do something better. So we do things like beach cleanups, and, you know, we try to conserve our environment, and we try to like combine that and combine like adventure therapy, and, you know, make it like this therapeutic thing, and also conserve our environment as best as we could. And we're still trying to figure out ways to do that, you know, as best as possible.
Yeah. I want to I'm thinking right now, because I'm thinking about something that Anthony, that you said, which was, you know, we oftentimes get looked at as the Shy Nation Youth kind of gets looked at like the mystical Indians that are frolicking in the land and healing the earth, right? Well, part of that kind of really belies this actual demographic fact that there are tens of thousands of urban natives living in Chicago right now, right? So as much as like a Western imagination and U.S. historical imagination always cast natives as people that populate the past rather than are fully alive in the present, and when they are in the present, they seldomly acknowledge the amount of native people that are living in major metropolitan areas. And so I guess what I'm interested in, right, is like Shy Nations, you guys are doing like a bunch of like real ass shit in terms of kind of addressing some of these issues that are not just coming, or that are informed, of course, by like cultural understandings and sacred understandings of like of water and land, but that also have like, you know, actual practical action and real actions that you guys are doing. Can you talk to us about some of the work that you all are doing around land and water, you know, in Chicago?
Yeah. So. I mean, just recently we were up in northern Minnesota fighting against the Line 3 pipeline that Enbridge is putting in, that's running through several native communities, but also I believe it's 21 bodies of water underneath it. And that's, you know, we were able to go up there and we were able to maple tap. So again, asserting our treaty rights right along a pipeline that is actively destroying native people's ways of life, destroying our wild rice crops that can only grow, you know, in bodies of water. So when we have spills, we're destroying native people's foods. The same thing when, you know, pipelines spill, you know, by forest where we maple tap, right? Plants suck things up from the ground, so that prevents us from being able to, you know, maple tap in the future. You know, but among that, we have the First Nations Garden, which is a garden located in Albany Park, and we don't have any access to water there, right? And it's near impossible for us to be able to plant a lot of our traditional foods and our traditional medicines along with prairie plants because we don't have that water. So, you know, we have to go to my house and we have to fill up the little 5-gallon buckets from our hose, bring them to the garden, fill up the rain barrels, and then water our plants. So, you know, even today, it's very hard for Native people to still have access to that water. But, you know, I was, a couple weeks ago, I was in North Dakota, and one of the elders there said one of the gifts that our Creator has given us is the gift of resiliency for Native people. And so just, practicing that as an Indigenous person, being resilient, but also going out onto the river without asking permission. I don't, as a Native person, I don't have to ask permission to go into the lake or to go into the river. Why should I? My people have been here for thousands of years. And so just the act of doing things rather than asking for permission. But another thing is like restoring prairies in and around Chicago, right? I work for the city of Chicago. I work for an alderman. And one of the constant things that we get is, hey, the street's flooding, or hey, my basement's flooding. Yeah, those things are going to happen when you live on a swamp, and those things are going to happen when you have things like grass, right? Because when we plant native prairies roots go 6 feet down into the ground and they suck the water up, as opposed to what's around us, right? This is not going to do anything for when it floods, and so teaching people our knowledge systems of like how our plants work, and to try to get those reintroduced into the city of Chicago. Because I mean, it's something that we need to see more of, and it's one of those things that Native people are willing to share, right? Because we know that there are certain things that we can't keep to ourselves and that we have to share. But it's also things like holding elected officials accountable, right? When hearing everyone up here speak, one thing that I instantly thought of, one of the most corrupt forms of government that we have here in the city of Chicago and Cook County is our water reclamation district, right? That's one of the most corrupt forms of government we have here in the city of Chicago, because commissioners there have historically taken money from engineering companies who want to build along the river and along our lakes. And that is why we end up in predicaments like this where, we have shit backing up into our river, where we have dirty lakes, right? And it's just holding those people accountable and going into those spaces and, letting them know, like, if you're not going to do it, then we are.
Anthony, which alderman do you work for?
I work for the 33rd Ward Alderman, for Son of Red Kids.
And how have you been able to kind of inform some of the work that is happening in that office, specifically around environmental land and water justice?
Yeah, so, I mean, just being a Native person in an elected official's office, again, it's, I get to be that constant reminder to that elected official, to my boss, that, she not only has an obligation to the movement that she's fighting for, but she has an obligation to Native people, and to include Native people in that movement that she is fighting for. Oftentimes, in like leftist groups or woke groups, we're talking about a movement, but Native people are left out of those conversations, and we're not talking about environmental justice, which is very much a part of the movement, right? We're forgetting about the most important thing. That movement is happening on this land, in the city of Chicago. And we're not talking about the things around us, and we're not including those things where we go about our daily lives as if they're just things among us, when we really need to start including them, in movement building and in our work that we're doing. The ward that we work for, it's along the North Channel, and part of that, half of that is in our ward, and I have seen that the environmental work that's being done along the river there has been a catalyst for gentrification, and so they're making these, revitalizing these places. They're planting prairies along the river, but in the very same breath, they're taking brown people who have lived in those communities for 50 plus years out of those communities. And so we know that, they're not doing this for the health of the river. They're doing this for the health of their pockets and for the health of their egos, right? Making the water or along the water healthy is not for brown people. It is to get them out of that community, so we can have people like developers and people who want to own those multi-million-dollar homes. Oh, this is pretty, let me move here, while actively displacing people like myself and other Native communities.
Well, it's also, right, like I think one of the historical tricks of colonization has always been to try and naturalize your tie to the land, right? So even when we think about the Boston Tea Party, one of the things that they did was dress up as natives to kind of make it right. I think there's a weird psychoanalysis there about trying to naturalize and you perform native to have a claim to the land. But now it's even interesting because in all these gentrifying spaces, they're kind of trying to recreate the natural landscape, and as though that gives them a certain claim to be able to be there, and it's like a bizarre beautification process that you're talking about.
Well, if you think about equity, right, and think about a home. If you buy a home and you increase its equity, you can take that equity out. So every time a frontline community invests our time and energy in sustaining, into cleaning,
sorry, Mila, can you explain for the audience what a frontline community is?
Frontline community is a community that is receiving the brunt of the harm, living in that space, receiving the stressor. And so here we are spending our lives and generations advocating for the land. And you know what? It hurts so bad thinking that water is being killed because of the color of my skin. The only reason why the water here, where I'm at, for example, that's being contaminated and not protected is because it's associated with me. And that does something to you. To know that the water is being made sick or it's not being protected, like the water where somebody who's white is because I'm black, it makes you feel like you're dirty. You're the reason why the environment is how it is. And so when we increase the equity of our land and water, it now becomes attractive to investors, right? Because the way that Chicago and all these cities use its natural resources is a draw. Lake Michigan draws in millions of people a year just to look at the skyline. That golf course on the south side, unparalleled views of the lake. They're selling views of the lake. They're not even interested in investing in life rings to make sure people don't drown. We don't have any drowning prevention on Lake Michigan shores at all here in the city of Chicago, even though brown kids, black kids are the highest rates of those who are drowning. And so we do have to think critically about how investments into our environment now becomes attractive for investors. And we are displaced, and guess what we get to do? We get to be the frontline community in another community. And that's the part that we have to make sure doesn't happen. Gentrification and white flight are connected. We don't want to be displaced because we want a healthy environment. We don't want to help you move us out of the way, further away from jobs, further away from opportunities, further away from transportation. We say Chicago deals with poverty by moving it. Right? So if you look at the south suburbs in East Indiana, and you see who's there, and you look at Calumet City, you look at Dalton, you look at Hammond, you look at South Holland, you'll see that people who look like me are now stuck in the suburbs, have very little access to come here, also having their own water issues, high rates of unemployment and the density of people, low tax base. Cities are overwhelmed, not being able to provide basic public services, and the environmental ethics of that population changes as well. And so as people move around the landscape, as we will increase in our population in the state of Illinois, we do have to understand who is where is going to determine the types of actions that elected officials will take, what places they will prioritize for investments. Urban flooding is not going anywhere. Lead removal of pipes is supposed to be, moving forward. But we cannot miss the opportunity during this, new wave of money, opportunities connecting to environmental justice to help everyone who's black and brown and allies working in water sectors, plumbers, landscapers, developers, public health people, medical professionals, to understand how important our water is to our economy and to our livelihoods.
So, it's like super fucking exciting because, right, like so oftentimes like the people that are on this panel are people that are left out of, right, like the people of color, Native people are left out of conversations within the environmental justice, like, and when you think about leftist circles or woke circles, like if it ain't Alexandria Ocasio or Bernie talking about the fucking Green Deal, it's like we don't need to hear, right, like it's like that's like the limit of like how we're defining this, right? And so I think this conversation is like so. It's just even to see the stuff that I'm hearing is like already kind of like, I feel it kind of transforming the way I'm thinking about certain stuff. Rachel, I think when I think about the Freshwater Lab, one of the things that it's been very intentional about is including and trying to have its work informed by indigenous perspectives, the lived experiences of people of color in Chicago, and the resistance that comes from there as part, which I think is revolutionary when you think about the way so much of environmentalist activism has been from a white-centered point of view. Can you talk to us a little bit how the Freshwater Lab, which is a part of a public university, but as someone that's went to a public university, they can also be these neoliberal, fucked up institutions that are really harmful towards POC. How are you thinking about, and how is the work of the Freshwater Lab, and how, been informed by the experiences and the perspectives of people of color, and how has that changed your understanding of the river, and what radical possibilities do you see with that?
Yeah, thank you. So, the approach of the Freshwater Lab, and again, the Freshwater Lab is really the people that come through, Mila being someone really on the ground floor, and the team today, putting this on, being this new, and of course Ricardo, our favorite host. So it's also who comes through, but the idea is the approach of the watershed. I mean, we are interconnected, through and by this water. Like it's the lifeblood that runs through us. And there's an image, and I'm humble before it. I'm still trying to understand this Ojibwe image that was shown to me, which are the clans, the representations of the clans, and it's the lakes running through their hearts as these threads that interconnect them. And so we're the people of the Lake Michigan watershed, but we don't experience this water the same way. This is what we've been hearing there. We have different access to it. We have different pipes that it runs through. Our bodies have internalized different parts of it. We're exposed to different things. And so, so the Freshwater Lab, it's about, trying to bring all these voices and experiences together, and then ask, okay, so how? Like, what's the how and what's the what? And, we know that it's this key moment because of the water needs us, we need it. Other people in other places of the world are going to turn to us and need it, but we can't do anything if we don't know how to work together. If we don't know how to elevate, I'm again really honored to be on this panel. You're
welcome.
It's this kind of leadership. And so, what I think, the Freshwater Lab, there's a lot going on, but it's also about learning together, from all these different points of view, and thinking about what the work is, and Mila's brought so much to it, and everyone that's come through continues to bring so much into it. So it's we've got to think about that. We've got to learn our water in that way. And so it's a very different kind of lab, because it's not about getting some quantified marker of what's going on with the water. It's really about the voices and the stories and this embodied knowledge. And then we build on that, and hopefully we figure out how to transform all these backward things. It's not all going to be done, and it's never easy, but I think that's the way you go forward. And one more thing I'll say, Frank Edowagishik, who's an Odawa elder, who's really key to the Freshwater Lab and my own learning, he said recently, and in the end, relationship is everything. It's if you, think you're going to some goal point and you have broken relationships and exploitative relationships, you've got nothing. But if you didn't meet your marker or meet your deadline, and you've got these healthy, restorative, symbiotic, mutually nurturing relationships, then you've got a world to build on.
I have a lot of broken relationships, but that's because gay men suck. The worst part about being, I'm embarrassed to be gay because I'm attracted to men and most of them are trash. So just wanted to throw that out there because I don't have a therapist. So we are way over time for two reasons. One, because I'm hungover and wasn't on top of my game. I'll be better next time. And two, because I literally got lost, lost in just like listening to everything what everyone was saying, and just really taken with it. But I do want to close with you, Rox. So you better make this good, or I will talk about you behind your back. I guess the question that I'm asking, right, is when I think about, because so much of this, what I love about Chicago Adventure Therapy, right, is like, even though that language of like adventure and therapy, taking this idea of like discovery and play and joy, and then therapy of like this like healing, reflective, and relational, right? Actually, kind of like possibility. And imagine, and imagining the work that you guys do. How have you been transformed in your work there with the river? And also, what's a transformation you've seen? I want a story. I want these people crying. I want them going to your nonprofit and making donations. Make them to Shy Nations Youth Council first. All right. But can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I actually started off as a participant with
That's
Chicago.
Great. That always works. That always works. When you're like, I'm not just a caller. I was a callee.
Yeah, I started off as a participant with Chicago Adventure Therapy. I actually used to be one of those, troubled youth, as they used to call it. So like, what?
Now I'm just a troubled adult, but same.
Yeah, troubled adult, troubled youth, just growing up. No, but, gosh. What was the question again?
How have you been transformed by your work with Chicago Adventure Therapy, and what are some of the transformations you've seen?
Oh yeah. So basically, some of the transformations that I've seen was, we have helped out a lot of like people of color, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, like a lot of people, become their best selves through adventure, therapy, as cliche as it sounds. We take them out kayaking and let them explore, the outdoors and, get to know themselves. And, we also, excuse me. We also, try to, find ways to like turn them into leaders, and that's something that I can obviously relate to, because, that's how I became a leader as well, and we try to do as much conservation as possible. And I can go on about this for days, so I'm just gonna like leave it at that.
Give me more.
Yeah,
No, this is great. I was just kidding. So I feel so excited to have been here, and you all should too. If you don't, you need to take a hard look at yourselves, because you are the problem. I just dropped my quesadilla on me. But I do want to thank everyone for coming out, but more importantly, I want to thank Mila, Rox, Anthony, and Rachel. I encourage everyone to touch base with them to learn more about their work. And let's give a round of applause to our conversant.